Lower Decks is a Star Trek animated series that reads like a love letter to superfans everywhere. Endless cameos and Easter eggs invoke a wave of nostalgia, and the silly shenanigans are often laugh out loud funny. This video will walk through the final season of this beloved show. Major spoilers lie ahead, so consider yourself warned. Also, timestamps are below, so you can jump ahead at any time. Now, let's review Season 5 of Star Trek Lower Decks. In Episode 1, the crew of the Cerritos finds a quantum fissure, and this is already the third time this week or this month or something like that. So clearly there's something suspicious going on. And it's this moment that makes me think maybe this is going to be the season-long arc, but it's so early in the season that it's hard to tell. Anyways, the Cerritos gets pulled into the quantum fissure, because of course it does, and they run into their duplicates. Now what's interesting is as soon as they see their duplicates, they immediately all start fighting each other. On the one hand, I absolutely love this classic Trek trope of mirror universe, or this like sliding doors feel of what would things be like if one character made slightly different choices than another character. On the other hand, I'm curious why their initial reaction is to despise each other. With a few notable exceptions like Talen and Mariner, most of the doubles just cannot get along, but that's what adds to the fun of it. One of the best parts of this episode is kind of the contrast that we get between a handful of the doubles. Captain Freeman discovers that she does not have a double on board because apparently her counterpart messed up too many times and ended up stationed at Starbase 80 as some kind of punishment. The captain of the ship in the alt universe is actually Mariner, who is still going by her first name, Becky. She's a tough, no-nonsense kind of person, which is the total opposite of the Mariner that we know and love, who's kind of a goofball. Rutherford is pretty different from Otherford, who has just gone full Borg in an attempt to get rid of all his human emotions because he's so sad that Tendi left the crew. Boimler's double is very cool and very confident and immediately becomes Boimler's new idol. Now, on the one hand, this is a huge step back because when we get to the end of season 4, Boimler's really coming to his own. He seems really confident and satisfied in who he is, and it seems like a lot of the insecurities are kind of going away. However, in this first episode, he takes a huge step back and goes back to being super insecure and wishing he was someone else, except for ironically, the someone else he wishes he was is also him. On the other hand, it is really cool to see this confident and in charge version of Boimler. And I love that if he's going to be obsessing over someone and trying to recreate someone else's life, at least it's some version of him. Towards the end of the episode, Boimler does steal his duplicate's pad so that he can pour over all his personal logs and try to make every choice that he made in order to become this person, which leads to all kinds of fun disasters. Overall, this is a really good episode, a really strong start to season 5. I loved seeing the duplicates. I loved seeing them interact. And I was kind of hoping we would get a little bit more of this throughout the season. That doesn't quite happen. Episode 2 starts with a battle between Tendi and her house and the Blue Orions they're at war with. Back in episode 1, Tendi did one last job to clear her debt to Erica so that she could go back to Starfleet. However, she also accidentally started a war at the same time, so she decided to stay a little bit longer to clean up the mess she made. Now, this whole episode really revolves around sisterly love, which is really sweet and beautiful. Tendi finds out that Erica's pregnant, but she's been keeping it a big secret from her. This leads Tendi to do everything she can during this super dangerous race through a nebula to try to protect Erica and her unborn child. Little does she know that everybody knows about the baby except for her, and the only reason Erica didn't tell her is because Orion culture demands that Tendi stay on the planet and raise the new child to take over her title over the next 14 years. And she knows that Tendi in her heart of hearts just wants to go back to Starfleet, and she wants to give that gift to her. So at the end, they hug, they make up, and Tendi does return to Starfleet. Now, what I love about this episode is just the tenderness that we see between the two sisters. I also love all the backstory we get about Orions. I don't know if we've ever learned this much about their culture before this particular episode, but I am here for it. I also like seeing Tendi's family and their dynamics. At the end of the episode, they actually end up losing all of their wealth and being kicked out of the syndicate. But at the same time, the Cerritos was helping a planet that's newly joined the Federation and is now post-scarcity get rid of all of their monetary wealth. So they have a perfect connection for a little swap, and Tendi's family becomes the collectors of all this wealth to get rid of it from that planet, and they also kind of restore their families well. So everybody wins. While overall I thought this was a very emotionally satisfying episode, I also noticed a distinctive lack of any mention of the fissures. So at this point I'm thinking, well, maybe the fissures are not going to be the series-long mystery, because it was a really big deal in the first episode, but it's not even a footnote in the second episode. So maybe the whole point of that was just for Boimler to get this alt universe pad so we could follow him in those hijinks. Episode 3 also deals with relationships, but instead of being a familial relationship, relationship, we revisit the situation between Mariner and Jennifer. I honestly had already sort of forgotten about this couple because they broke up way back in season 3 when Mariner was accused of bad-mouthing the Cerritos and banished to Starbase 80. Jennifer, along with the entire crew, turned her back on Mariner as some kind of traitor. Now, when Mariner returned to the ship and was proved to be innocent, was proved to be in fact the only person on the whole ship who said good things about the ship, Jennifer never apologized, and Mariner never spoke to her again. She just kind of cut her off, gave her the silent treatment, and they moved on with their lives. So in this episode, we find out that Jennifer is leaving the ship and she's going to go join another ship that has more Andorian crew and, in her mind, more opportunities for her to advance her career. But before she leaves, she wants to make sure that they have this official breakup conversation. So she goes on an away mission with Mariner and pretends like they're still together to force this moment. Of course, it's extremely awkward and hilarious, and they do end up having the conversation and they part as friends. At the same time, there is this major nanite swarm that's raging through this interstellar cruise ship. It's gobbling up all the metal it can find and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The lower deckers do manage to get rid of it and discover that the entire swarm was being controlled by a microscopic Starfleet vessel. This vessel slipped through yet another fissure, and it was just trying to get enough energy to get back home. So while that is a bit of a footnote to this episode, it at least confirmed to me that yes, the series-long arc is going to be about these quantum fissures. So now I'm excited. I'm like, okay, maybe the next episode will go a little bit deeper into the fissures, but that is not what happened either. In episode 4, we find ourselves in the Klingon home world, and we're seeing what happened to Mach after all of the events in season 4. Turns out he was stripped of his captaincy because the lower deckers on his ship mutinied. So now he's working back at the family farm with his bumbling brother Maylor, creating blood wine for local bars. This has a very Chateau Picard feel to it. Kind of like the TNG episode Family, where Picard has been rescued from the Borg and he goes back home to chat with his brother and it's kind of a disaster. Mach definitely brings that same energy of kind of defeat and not really fitting in. At some point, Mariner and Boimler show up to help out. Mach single-handedly saved Mariner's life back in season 4, so now she feels like she owes him. And Boimler happens to be obsessing about Klingon culture and rituals, and so he knows all the little secrets in order to get Mach his captaincy back. At the very, very end of this episode, Mariner mentioned something about being nearby because the Cerritos wanted to investigate a quantum fissure. It's one sentence, blink and you'll miss it, but it does sort of weave through this thread that proves that this is in fact going to be the mystery. However, this episode didn't cover it at all. When I first saw this episode, I didn't super love it, and that's just because it really didn't deal with the major mystery of the fissures, but it also didn't really deal with the lower deckers. While we do see Mariner and Boimler in this episode, and they're a lot of fun, really this entire episode is about Mach and his journey of figuring out what he wants in life. It's a great storyline, but it feels disconnected from the things that I most want to know at this moment. I mean, it is season 5, the final season of the show, and I kind of want as much time as possible enjoying our main cast of lower deckers and seeing them grow and develop. That being said, the more times I watch this episode, the more I like it. I do think this is a great episode. I just think I would prefer it to be in a different season and not the final one. Also, the entire Dr. Miglimo storyline was just weird. In episode 5, we finally get to see Starbase 80, and I was so excited about this. They have been talking about Starbase 80, I'm pretty sure, since season 1, and it's supposed to be the worst place you could ever be stationed in all of Starfleet. So I was so amped to see what it's actually like. Also, we're halfway through this final season, and we have gotten zero additional information about these mysterious fissures. So this is the point in the show when I completely gave up all hope of ever discovering what those mysteries were and just decided to enjoy the ride. And that was a great decision. In this episode, we see that Starbase 80 is super old, really outdated, kind of creepy, and Mariner thinks it's cursed. The entire starbase is overrun by the nomadic gatherers, which are the more knifey version of the Akamarians that we met in TNG's Vengeance Factor. It's led by Cassia Knotts, an Elorian just like Guinan, who really believes in second chances, and that's why she volunteered for this post. I'm obsessed with Cassia Knotts, and I really like her character. I was really hoping we would see so much more of Cassia throughout the season, but let's be real, we only have 5 episodes left, so there was a slim chance of that. While they're on Starbase 80, the crew of the Cerritos gets infected by an anaphasic life form. This is similar to that green ghost that Beverly Crusher hooked up with in TNG's Sub Rosa. It's infecting everybody through their comm badges and causing them to attack people and lick things. In the end, they figure out that this anaphasic life form, I think its name is Glenn, is a lower decker itself and took over the entire ship in order to prove to its superiors that it could. And that's when we get Cassia's speech about second chances, and that's when Mariner realizes that that's exactly what the Cerritos is for also. It's just just this really cool moment of bonding that made this episode one of my favorite episodes from this entire season. In episode 6, we get a shape war between two types of photonic beings, the spheres and the cubes. There's also a Romeo and Juliet style romance between their offspring, which produces a brand new offspring called Squaw Aaron. And Squaw Aaron is so cute that he diffuses the war and causes the negotiations to reconvene. Once again, we get zero mention of these mysterious fissures, but at this point I've already given up, so I'm totally okay with that. We do meet a new crew member named Ensign Ali, who is a demigod with electric superpowers. This character is a lot of fun. Basically, she behaves exactly like Mariner did back in season 1, except that we discover that all of her mess-ups are a result of her powers not being under her control and causing systems around her to spaz out, versus Mariner, where all of her mess-ups were just straight up defiance because she doesn't like authority. The great thing about Ollie is that she helps us see how far Mariner has come. And while that's great, I will also say that I feel like we saw her growth in the very first episode of this season. In fact, she seems to be the only character who's grown dramatically over the last 5 years, other than Captain Freeman. So I kind of feel like we didn't need episode after episode after episode that shows how much Mariner has grown. I'd rather see Tendi or Rutherford or T'Len grow and change. However, that being said, this was still a really great episode. Similar to the last couple of episodes, I feel like this would have been better in a different season because it doesn't give a lot of the emotional payoff that I'm looking for when a show is wrapping up. But I did really enjoy Ensign Ollie, and I really hoped that they would bring this character back. In episode 7, we get a time dilation planet similar to what happened in Voyager's Blink of an Eye. It also reminds Mariner of Picard's experience in Inner Light, which causes her to go out of her way to try to have a meaningful human connection before her time on this planet is up. Due to some kind of transporter accident, T'Len, Mariner, and Tendi end up trapped on this pre-war planet for a year instead of the intended hour. Mariner spends most of it in and out of jail because she keeps accidentally committing crimes. Tendi and T'Len, on the other hand, have this fierce competition going on to see which one of them is more sciencey than the other because they both apply to the same science position on the Cerritos. Now, really this competition is very one-sided because Tendi feels like T'Len is trying to outscience her, so then Tendi's trying to outscience her back. T'Len, on the other hand, has no idea this competition is going on, and she's just making the best of a bad situation. It's not until they both get captured and tied up that they can have a heart-to-heart conversation about all of this. So again, this episode is about friendship and open communication and honesty, and I really like it. We also get to see Data's severed head again, and I'm here for that. And we get some fun new alien looks, which is another one of my favorite Trek tropes, when members of the crew get surgically altered to fit in with the locals. This is another great episode, and I think this is a really good one to put in season 5. But it's at this point that I'm starting to get a little nervous. We only have 3 episodes left, and we have no hint of what's going to happen to these characters next. So now I'm thinking, are we going to do that flash forward so we see where they are in 20 years? Are we going to see them all commanding ships? What is going to happen to these characters that we know and love? And how are they going to convey that in a way that's satisfying with only 3 episodes to go? Then my fears get completely confirmed with episode 8, which is called Upper Deckers. That means this episode is not going to feature our lower deck crew at all. At first I was bummed because I really wanted to spend as much time as possible with these characters, but as soon as the episode started, I forgot all about that. This episode was so much fun. We finally get to see what the bridge crew does in their normal days, and it is just everything. We get to follow Captain Freeman around during her day. She goes to a concert, she goes to a fertility event, she goes to this one-man show, which is kind of like Data's ode to Spot, and she also fights off this invading force of Clickets who are trying to commandeer the ship. We also get to see Shax face his inner demons, and Billups face some outer demons when an AI golem that he got from the Binars literally tries to eat him. I think Billups' storyline is the most interesting in this episode, and it's the least touched upon. This is one of my favorite episodes of this entire season. It's so good. And even though once again there's no mention of the fissures, I'm okay with that because this episode is just so much fun. This brings us to episode 9, which is called Fissure Quest. So here's where I knew we were finally going to get some answers, and I was not disappointed. We finally find out whatever happened to William Boimler, and that's Brad Boimler's transporter twin, who he thinks was killed in some freak accident, but whose death was actually faked so that he could be recruited to join Section 31. Turns out he's been tasked with trying to figure out who is creating these fissures and closing them. While going on these missions, he's kind of collecting all of these variants that he finds in all these different timelines. He's got a Klingon Curzon Dax instead of Jadzia. He's got a holographic Dr. Bashir, who's married to Garrick, and he's got a whole gaggle of Harry Kims, one of which has actually been promoted in his universe. In this episode, we find out that these fissures have actually been caused by a Starfleet vessel captained by Lily Sloan. That is the same Lily Sloan who helped Zephyr Cochrane create the warp drive in the Prime Line. They had no idea they were creating fissures in other universes every time they traveled. And the only reason they didn't say anything to Primeline Starfleet is that they were following their own version of some kind of multiverse prime directive. They don't communicate with other realities who don't have the ability to travel through space-time. So there was no big bad, there was no nefarious plot, it was just an honest accident. The two crews decide to work together to fix some of the damage that the Beagle has done. But before the ship can be fully repaired, Lieutenant Kim hijacks it and kidnaps all the other Kims to try to take them to his universe, a place where they will be appreciated and finally get promoted. Unfortunately, because the ship is not quite ready, it explodes inside of the rift that it's creating. That explosion creates a wave of deadly soliton particles that are going to rip apart all space and time. So William Boimler tells Lily and Mariner to send the beam back to his timeline because he's confident that his duplicate will be able to solve this crisis. And that's when we get our first and last to be continued. In the final episode, we find out that this deadly soliton wave actually doesn't rip space-time apart. What it does instead is it transforms matter into other quantum possibilities. We also see at the very beginning of this episode, a wave hit a Klingon ship and turn the Klingons into the Discovery era Klingons. At the end of the episode, we see the wave hit another Klingon ship and turn them into the Proto-Klingons that we saw in TNG's Genesis. We also see a wave hit another Klingon vessel and turn it into the Barge of the Dead from Voyager. Starfleet comes up with this shielding technology that's going to help protect the Cerritos against the effects of these waves, but they can only get partial shields active, which means that the entire crew is protected from being transformed, but the ship is not. So we get yet another treat of seeing the ship transform to all these different classes of Starfleet vessels. Naturally, the Cerritos is the only ship close enough to close the rift, and there's no time to spare, so they're sent in to save the day. Unfortunately, by the time they reach the center of the rift, it becomes clear that they can't close it. But thanks to a genius idea from Malor, Mariner's inspired to stabilize the rift instead. So the Cerritos saves the universe. In fact, they save the multiverse. Since the rift is stabilized, there's no more danger of ripping holes in space-time, and this now gives Starfleet the opportunity to explore strange new realities. William Boimler's ship returns, so we get to see all those variants. Starbase 80 is stationed in front of the rift, so we do get to see Cassia Knotts again. She only has like one line, but whatever, we get to see her. Ensign Ollie apparently has mastered her powers because she uses a giant lightning bolt to disable an attacking vessel inside of the rift. And we get this extremely beautiful montage of all of these slice of life moments that are happening between the Cerritos crew, while Mariner gives this truly emotional speech about what it means to be Cerritos strong. It's one of the best parts of the episode, I think, just for the catharsis that I had been looking for all season long. But even without that, this episode is so fun. Watching all the transformations and all the space battles, lots of action, so beautiful, so interesting. I would say the only downside of this episode is that the crew starts to fight a lot amongst themselves, really inexplicably. Like, it's not explained why they do this. Rutherford ends up hating the ship, but then he removes his Oculus so he can love the ship. Okay. But also T'Lyn and Tendi start fighting for some reason. Mariner and Mach start fighting. And there's just kind of all of this tension that happens before they pull together and save the day. That would probably be my only complaint. But other than that, I think this is a really good, solid episode and a really good season finale. Now, that being said, it doesn't feel like a series finale. It very much feels like a jumping off point for another season. And I don't know if this was wishful thinking on the part of the show creators, or if they wanted that never-ending story vibe where you feel like the adventures just continue. But either way, this definitely felt more like a comma and less like a period at the end of a sentence. Overall, I think season 5 was really good, but I think season 4 was actually a lot stronger. The season-long arc was really cohesive. It was touched upon in every single episode leading up to the finale. The reveal was really satisfying and dramatic. The solution was really satisfying and dramatic. Season 5 felt a little bit more like a bunch of random episodes, and then also this is the end. But that being said, I love the idea of this stable rift, opening up the potential for the multiverse. I love that Starbase 80 got a glow up. Captain Freeman is put in charge of the multiverse missions. So while Cassia Knotts is still in charge of Starbase 80, Captain Freeman is also going to be on Starbase 80, specifically to monitor and supervise any of the missions through the rift. So that loops back around to the initial episode when Captain Freeman was put on Starbase 80 as some kind of punishment. In the Prime line, Captain Freeman is put on Starbase 80 as a promotion. Also, her husband, the Admiral, joins her so they can actually spend some time together, which is really cool. Ransom gets promoted to captain for some reason, and then he decides to make Boimler and Mariner co-first officers, which makes no sense. But he thinks it'll be great for competition. Then they kind of fly off into space to do what they do, which is what makes me think, what's going to happen next? Are they going to do a movie for Lower Decks? Are they thinking about doing a live action version? Are they going to do some kind of spin-off that's all about Starbase 80 80s, so we get like a Deep Space Nine vibe, but with the multiverse, which, by the way, I would absolutely watch. I don't know. Let me know your predictions in the comments below. I personally think this is it for the show. However, I think they've left it open-ended just in case. Only time will tell. Be sure to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and then click or tap the screen to watch another video that YouTube thinks you'll like, or restart this series from the very beginning.